I was 24, fresh out of university, and trying to prove myself at my first real job, a data analyst position for a surprisingly large corporation. The work itself was unremarkable, mostly spreadsheets and reports, but the company culture was unique. They really pushed team building to the point where it felt less like encouragement and more like obligation. That's how I ended up agreeing to a 3-day corporate retreat, deep in the mountains. The breakfast buffet was extensive. It was ridiculously so. There were 3 kinds of eggs, waffles, pancakes, and a carving station with ham, plus all the usual items. I grabbed a plate of scrambled eggs and some fruit, then found a table near the window. It was still gray outside, drizzling, beautiful in a bleak sort of way. This place, Blackwood Lodge, was designed to impress, I guess. It was all glass and polished wood. I sat with Arlen and Connie. Arlen was already talking about quarterly projections, even on a Saturday. Connie just nodded and ate, which was fine with me. I was still trying to get my bearings. The air, it was still there, that metallic tang. It wasn't strong, but it was persistent. I found myself sniffing, trying to place it. I noticed it was strongest near the vents. I mentioned it to Arlen. "Metallic," he said, mid-sentence about market share. "Huh. Probably just the plumbing. It's an old building, even if it doesn't look it. They probably use some kind of galvanized pipes or something." That sounded reasonable. I let it go. We talked shop for a bit, then Connie chimed in, asking about my onboarding experience. It was all very corporate, very let's build synergy. The whole retreat was supposed to be about team building, identifying our strengths, that sort of thing. They kept mentioning unlocking potential. It felt a little cheesy, honestly. Later, walking to the first session, a personality assessment, I passed a maintenance closet. The door was slightly ajar. The smell practically hit me. It was like sucking on a 9-volt battery. I peered inside. There were just cleaning supplies, mops and buckets. But the vent cover was off, and the ductwork inside was gleaming. It wasn't with dust, but with something silver and wet. Definitely not galvanized pipes. The personality assessment was strange. Not the questions. Those were standard corporate fluff. It was the room. Everything was white. White walls, white chairs, even the little numbered placards on the desks were white on white, and the air was colder in there. That metallic smell was fainter, but definitely present. I kept glancing at the vent near the ceiling, not silver like in the closet, just clean, too clean. Afterward, Arlen and Connie cornered me by the coffee station. Arlen was all smiles, asking about my strengths. Connie just watched, a little too intently. She asked if I noticed anything off about the room. I said it felt cold, and she nodded slowly, like she was expecting that. "It's designed to be neutral," she said, "to minimize distraction." It sounded like something out of the brochure. I took the long way back to my room after that. The lodge was laid out like a maze, all these connecting hallways. I remembered seeing a small library on the map and figured I'd check it out. But when I turned the corner towards it, there was a figure standing in the hallway. Just for a second. Tall, dark coat, facing away. When I blinked, it was gone. Probably just another attendee. Kenji, maybe. He's pretty quiet. But the library was at the end of a long, empty hall. No one should have been there. I decided to skip the library. Later, I was trying to work, staring at my laptop when I heard it. A scraping sound coming from inside my room. Not a bump, not a creak, but something deliberately scraping against the wall. I froze. It stopped. I listened for a minute, heart hammering. Probably just the old building settling, I told myself. But the sound came from behind the headboard. There's no access panel there. Nothing should be scraping against the wall back there. I pushed the bed away from the wall just to look. Nothing, just the wall. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was definitely wrong. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the building felt deliberate, like someone was testing the floorboards just outside my door. I kept the light on, just a small lamp, but it didn't really help. I kept replaying that scraping sound in my head. It wasn't settling. It wasn't. Around 3 a.m. I heard it again, louder this time, and then a thump. Like something had fallen against the wall inside. I sat up, frozen. Then the door handle rattled. Not a hard rattle, but a slow, testing turn. Like someone was seeing if it was locked. It wasn't. I didn't think. I just grabbed the heavy glass wastebasket from beside the desk and held it like a weapon. The door started to open. Slowly, I braced myself. It wasn't a person. It was Kenji. He was swaying and looked completely lost. He mumbled something about needing a glass of water. He didn't even seem to register that I was standing there with a wastebasket raised. He just shuffled past me toward the bathroom. I lowered the wastebasket, my arms shaking. What the hell was that? He was pale, eyes glazed over. I thought maybe he was sleepwalking, or maybe they were drugging the water. It sounded crazy, even to me, but everything felt crazy. He came back a minute later. He didn't meet my eyes, just nodded and went back to his room. I locked the door, finally, and then I noticed it, a small dark smear on the carpet, right where Kenji had stood. It wasn't water. It smelled metallic, like the air vents. I touched it with my finger, then immediately regretted it. It was sticky. I scrubbed at my finger with my pajama pants. I need to get out of here now. I stood there, staring at the spot on the floor. It was still tacky, even in the dim light filtering through the gap in the curtains. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind made me jump. I kept replaying the doorknob rattling in my head. It wasn't a forceful rattle, more like someone testing it slowly. First thing, I called Connie. She's in HR, always so collected. I told her everything, about the scraping, the sticky stuff, the doorknob. I left out the part about feeling like I was being watched, though it sounded crazy even to me. She listened, asked a lot of questions about the building's history, if there had been renovations. She said old buildings settle. The sticky stuff, probably just residue from cleaning. She promised she'd mention it to security, just to be safe. Two security guys, Arlen and Tobias, came up around 10 o'clock. They poked around and shone flashlights. Arlen took a sample of the stuff on the floor with a little swab. He didn't seem particularly concerned. He kept saying it was probably just old varnish or something. Tobias just kept looking at me, a weirdly assessing look. He asked if I was feeling stressed, if the retreat was getting to me. I said I was fine, just a little spooked. They left. Said they'd send the sample to a lab. Connie called back later. The lab results came back inconclusive. Some kind of organic compound, she said, sounding distant. Could be anything, really. She said Arlen thought it might be bird droppings that had seeped in through a crack in the wall. Bird droppings. That's what they thought. It felt like they were trying to downplay it, and Connie wasn't her usual reassuring self. She kept asking if I was sure I hadn't been drinking. I think it's Kenji. He's always been subtly antagonistic, making little comments. He's the one who suggested I volunteer for this team-building exercise in the first place. He knows I'm not a company person. He's trying to push me out. It has to be. It's been years, 6 or 7 years. I still check the locks. Not every time, and not obsessively. But if I'm staying somewhere new, or even just tired, I'll do the slow turn of the handle, testing the resistance before I actually pull the door closed. It started there, at the retreat, with that feeling of being watched. It wasn't just a feeling, though. It was the way the doorknob felt, slightly loose, like someone had been fiddling with it. I remember thinking it was Kenji. He'd been so eager to get me involved in everything. The trust falls, the late-night strategy sessions, even suggesting I room with Tobias, who I'd barely spoken to. It all seemed designed to isolate me, to make me feel off balance. I convinced myself it was some kind of weird performance review in disguise, that they were trying to break people, to see who cracked under pressure. Logical, right? A ruthless efficiency program. I haven't seen most of them since. Arlen retired. I heard. Connie moved to a different department. Kenji, I don't know. I actively avoid looking him up. I tried to rationalize it after, to tell myself it was just stress, the isolation of the location, and the weird group dynamics. But the sticky patch on the carpet never made sense, and the way Jasper kept glancing at me during meals. It wasn't malicious, not exactly. More like assessment. Right now, I'm at a cafe. Just a quick coffee break. I went to the restroom, and as I closed the door, I did it. The slow turn of the handle, just to be sure. It's a habit now, and I still wonder, sometimes, if it was about performance at all, or if it was something else, something I still haven't understood. I started carrying breath mints after it happened, which is strange because I'd never been much of a sweets person. Now, I constantly feel the need to freshen my breath, even when I haven't eaten or spoken to anyone in hours. It's been almost a year since that autumn, when the leaves were turning and I was working a sales job in a city I barely knew. We'd just moved there for the position, and I was really trying to make a good impression. The coffee shop was good, not great, but reliably good. I'd started going every morning, mostly to force a routine. I would get there around 7:30, order a black coffee, and check emails. It was normal, which was the point. This city felt anything but. Yesterday, I noticed something odd. On the community board amongst the lost cat posters and guitar lessons was a flyer. Not a printed flyer, but a photograph. A Polaroid, actually, of my grandmother's ceramic robin, the one she made in her pottery class, the one that sat on her kitchen windowsill for as long as I could remember. It looked exactly like it. Same chipped beak, same slightly wonky eye. I stared at it for a good minute. Someone had a really similar robin. A lot of people make pottery, right? It was probably just a coincidence. I even took a picture of it with my phone, thinking I'd show my mom. Look, I'd say, someone else has good taste. Today, it was still there. Same photo. And next to it, a new one. This one was of the little wooden sailboat my dad built me when I was 8. The one with the faded blue hull and the patched sail. Again, undeniably it. I asked the barista, a guy named Felix, if he'd seen who put them up. He shrugged. People post all sorts of things. I don't pay much attention, honestly. But I was paying attention, and it felt wrong. Like someone was deliberately showing me something. I started popping breath mints. 2, then 3, then 4 in quick succession, just to have something to do with my mouth. I felt a tightness in my chest. Maybe it was a local artist doing a series on childhood nostalgia. Maybe someone was just messing with a new face in town. It felt targeted, though, and not in a malicious way, exactly. More like an assessment. The mints were constant. A roll a day, easily. I'd excuse myself during meetings just to have one. It wasn't the taste, not anymore. It was the physical act of doing something, of controlling something. I started taking the long way to work, looping around a few extra blocks, just different streets. I told myself it was to explore the neighborhood, find a decent deli. But it wasn't. It was because I kept glancing in my rearview mirror. Then I saw the car. A dark blue sedan, older model. I noticed it first parked across from the coffee shop while I was getting my usual. Then again, 2 blocks from my office. And yesterday, turning onto my street. It wasn't following, not exactly. It was present, always in my periphery. I mentioned it to Jules at work. She said I was probably just noticing a common car. It's a popular make. You're just paying attention now. But Jules doesn't go to that coffee shop. She doesn't know about the pictures. The pictures were different this morning. Not more, but shifted. The old photograph of my grandmother's quilt was gone, replaced by a picture of the chipped ceramic bird my grandfather made me when I was little. The one I thought I'd lost years ago. That's when it hit me. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a catalog. Someone was compiling a history of me, and they knew things they shouldn't. I think it's a really dedicated, if slightly creepy, fan of my online photography. I post a lot of old family stuff. Maybe they're building a shrine. It's unsettling, yeah, but harmless, right? I took a different route home tonight. A maze of side streets. I thought I'd lost the sedan. Then I saw a figure standing under a streetlight, watching. It was too far to make out a face, but the build, it was Vince, from accounting. He lives in the opposite direction. What was he doing there? He just stood there, and then slowly turned and walked away. The mints. I was going through them so fast, a whole pack before 10 in the morning. It wasn't even about the breath anymore. It was a compulsion, a shield. I kept thinking about the review. Price hadn't asked about my work. Not really, it was all personal. My childhood, my anxieties, things I hadn't even consciously remembered until he asked, and that photo in the coffee shop, my 8th birthday, the one with the clown. I decided to call in sick. Just disappear for a day, clear my head. But when I got to my car, a blue sedan was parked across the street. Empty. I waited, thinking someone might be inside, watching. Nothing. I drove to the highway, intending to just keep going and see where it led. Then my phone rang. It was Jules from HR. She said Price needed to speak with me immediately. Something about a critical miscommunication regarding my benefits. It felt orchestrated, like they knew where I was going. I ignored the call. I was almost past the city limits when I saw him. Vince, standing on the shoulder, thumb out, hitchhiking, in this weather? It felt wrong. I sped up. He started jogging, keeping pace with the car. I glanced in the rearview mirror. A beat-up pickup truck was gaining on me, riding my bumper. Then Vince was yelling. I couldn't make out the words, but he was waving his arms, pointing at the truck. The truck swerved, cutting me off and forcing me onto the shoulder. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the gravel. I thought they were working together, Vince and the driver. A setup, a really elaborate, terrifying setup. I put the car in reverse, flooring it, tires spitting gravel. I had to get out of there. I didn't look back. I just kept driving. I didn't stop until I hit the edge of town and pulled into that diner, the one with the chipped Formica tables. I ordered black coffee and went through a whole roll of those little mints. The stale diner air didn't help. Everything tasted wrong. I needed something clean. I called Jules. She's the only one I could think of who wouldn't just dismiss me as losing it. I told her everything. Vince, the truck, the feeling of being watched. She listened, which was good. She said it sounded intense. She said I should maybe take a few days and disconnect. But then she asked about the photos, about putting them online. You know, with work, she said, her voice careful, some people can get weird about that stuff, especially old family pictures. You never know who's looking. It clicked, or I thought it did. It wasn't about me. It was about the photos. Some relative, some disgruntled acquaintance, tracking me down because of something in a picture. A land dispute, a forgotten debt, something like that. It felt contained, manageable. Jules offered to talk to HR. She said she'd mention it to Price, casually, and see if anything had come up. She said I shouldn't worry. She'd handle it. I thanked her and felt a little of the tightness in my chest ease. I still went through another pack of mints while I was talking to her. 2 days later, I got a call from a detective, Norma. She said they'd been investigating an incident on Highway 17, a transport truck carrying industrial cleaning solvents. Apparently it had lost control and jackknifed. There were other vehicles involved. They wanted to know if I'd seen anything, if I'd noticed anything unusual. She mentioned Vince's name, and she said there were fatalities. The truck hadn't just lost control. Someone had tampered with the brakes. Norma called again 1 week later, not about the crash, directly about my performance review. Apparently Price had flagged something. He said I seemed distracted, unfocused. She wanted to understand what was going on, from my perspective. It was a strange way to put it. The review itself was normal enough, with a lot of corporate jargon about synergies and proactive engagement. But then she started asking about the drive, about what I'd seen. Not the crash, not Vince, but before that, about the hitchhiker. What he'd said, what I'd been thinking. It felt less like an investigation and more like an audit of my internal state. I kept popping mints. I couldn't stop. I would go through a full tin during a 10-minute conversation. I tried to explain the truck, the feeling of being run off the road, but she kept steering me back to the hitchhiker. She asked if I'd shared any details with anyone else, specifically mentioning Jules. I started to think it was about the photos. Maybe Vince had seen them. Maybe he was connected to someone at the company. That made a sick kind of sense. Someone trying to intimidate me, to scare me into silence. It felt contained, manageable, a threat I could understand. I haven't had a performance review since. Not a formal one. I just keep working. I still take the highway sometimes. And I still reach for the mints, always, even when my mouth doesn't feel dry, even when I'm just sitting at my desk staring at the screen. I was at the grocery store last week. picking up a few things. They were out of the winter mint flavor, the one I usually get. I stood there for a long time, looking at the other options, and then I just bought 5 of the spearmint tins. Just to have them. Just in case. I still remember the texture of the fabric on the massage table, a sort of nubby, almost plastic velour, pale blue. It was late spring, and the company had just rolled out this new wellness initiative after a particularly brutal quarter. We were all required to participate. A mix of guided meditation and individual coaching sessions meant to reduce stress and improve performance. I'd signed up for a session hoping for a little relief, a quiet hour away from my desk and endless spreadsheets. The massage was fine. Honestly, a little disappointing. I was expecting more, 30 minutes, and it felt like she barely worked out the knots in my shoulders. Still, free is free, and Bet had been really pushing the Wellness Wednesdays. She said it was good for morale, a way to de-stress. I mostly just felt aware of being touched. It was the table. I think that blue fabric. It wasn't cotton. It wasn't anything I recognized. Smooth, almost slick, like a very thin vinyl, but not quite. And that smell, it was faint, but I noticed it while I was lying face down. Metallic, but not like blood. More industrial, like a machine shop, but cleaner. I mentioned it to Petra on the way back to our floor. She just laughed and said it was probably the cleaning solution they used. That seemed reasonable. I was catching up on some data pulls when Winnie came by, asking if I'd seen Summit. She said he hadn't responded to her emails all afternoon, and she needed his sign-off on the quarterly report. Samit's usually glued to his inbox. A little odd, but he's always been a bit eccentric. He's in HR, which is ironic, considering. I hadn't seen him. I vaguely remembered seeing him heading towards the stairwell near the gym around the time of my appointment, but I didn't think much of it. People use the stairs to avoid the elevator, trying to be healthy, I guess. It must have been right after his session with Edison, actually. I remember Edison looking flustered when he came out, like he'd been interrupted. I just assumed it was a difficult client. Winnie looked genuinely worried, though. She spent the next hour tracking him down, eventually finding him in the server room, staring at the blinking lights. She said he was rambling about optimizations and synergy. I just figured the Wellness Wednesdays were getting to everyone's heads. Maybe they put something in the aromatherapy oil. It was just a weird day. I started taking the stairs, just a lot more of the time. The elevator felt close, too close, and Petra from accounting. I barely knew her, just nodded in the break room. She was always in there, always, making these little pointed comments about how good it was to be getting your steps in, how Wellness Wednesdays were really about preventative care. She'd smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was unsettling. Then I remembered the massage table, that smell. It wasn't aromatherapy, it was industrial, like cleaning fluid, but sweeter, and the texture not vinyl, more like a very thin layer of foam over something harder. I started noticing things. The Wellness Wednesdays posters were new, but the images felt recycled. Stock photos, but used stock photos, like they'd been bought cheap. I went to check on Edison, found him at his desk, meticulously organizing his staplers by color. He hadn't made eye contact with anyone all day. I asked if he was feeling okay. He just blinked, and then he said, very slowly, optimized. That's when I noticed the cameras. Not the security cameras, which we've always had, but smaller ones, discreetly placed in the corners of offices disguised as air fresheners or those little fake plants. I remembered seeing Midge installing them last week, saying something about environmental monitoring. I thought it was for temperature control. I tried to catch Winnie at lunch, tell her I was worried about Edison, about Samet, about everything. But she was already with Bet and Fran, the HR woman, all 3 of them huddled over a laptop laughing. When I got closer, they all went quiet. Winnie gave me this tight little smile. Just going over participation rates, she said. Everything's going great. I kept replaying the look on Winnie's face, that forced smile. It wasn't just about the wellness program, was it? It was something else. I started clearing out my desk, just personal stuff, photos, a plant, small things. I told Petra I had a family thing, a sick aunt. She didn't even look up from her spreadsheet. She just mumbled, okay. Then I remembered the key card. the one I'd found in the gym, the one that didn't have a name on it. I fished it out of my wallet. It was heavier than it looked. I remembered seeing Edison using a similar one to access the server room. I figured it was probably just a master key or something, but I had to know. I waited until late, past 6. Most people were gone. I slipped down to the server room. The door clicked open with the keycard. It shouldn't have. My keycard definitely didn't open this door. The room was cold, all blinking lights and humming, and there was Mort. He was wired into something. Cables ran from a machine to a headset he was wearing. He didn't seem to notice me. He was muttering. Not words, just sounds. Data points, numbers, and then he said a name. My name, clear as a bell. I backed away, knocking over a small metal stool. Mort's head snapped up. His eyes, they weren't focused. He blinked slowly, like waking from a dream. He saw me, and he smiled. A really wide, unsettling smile. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice flat. Just then the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. I turned and ran. I didn't stop running until I was out of the building, into the cold night air. I left everything. My bag, my coat, even my keys. I just needed to get away. I think they thought this was about stress management. I thought it was about stress management. Now I think they're trying to scare people into staying, into compliance. I spent the next 3 days mostly hiding, at my sister's, pretending to have a cold. She kept offering soup. I couldn't explain why I'd left my life behind on a Tuesday, so I just kept saying it was a bad flu. Finally, I checked the news. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a story about a rogue wellness program. Not exactly. It was about Innovatech, the company. A massive data breach. Millions of employee records were compromised, but the article mentioned something else, tucked away near the bottom. A research initiative, a pilot program for advanced employee performance metrics, had been shut down following a workplace accident. An accident. The picture accompanying the article was the server room, the one I'd broken into, and there, blurred in the background, was Mort. Mort from accounting. I barely knew the guy. He always kept to himself. He did the quarterly expense reports. I think I'd occasionally say good morning, and he'd mumble something back. I called the police, of course. I reported what I'd seen. They were polite, but distant. They told me the accident involved a power surge and a fire. No one was seriously hurt. They took my statement, asked a lot of questions about my mental state, and then basically told me to stay put. I decided I needed to go back, just to see. To prove to myself I hadn't imagined it. I drove to Innovatech this morning. The security guard, a new guy, barely glanced at my face. He just waved me through. He said they were still cleaning up from the incident. I walked straight to the server room. The door was open. It was empty, except for a single discarded headset, the kind they used in the wellness sessions. And there was a faint smell like burnt sugar. I think they were trying to erase everything, make it look like a simple accident, that they'd contained it, that it was just a fire. They were covering for Mort. He must have gotten hurt, and they were protecting him. He'd been overworked, stressed, maybe the equipment malfunctioned. That had to be it. But as I walked back towards the lobby, I saw Winnie from HR watching me. It wasn't a casual glance, it was assessment, cold, and she wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me. She didn't smile, she didn't nod, she just held my gaze, and I knew with a sickening certainty that they knew I'd been there, and they knew I'd come back. It's funny. The things you remember, not the big stuff, not the fear exactly, but the details, like the way the fluorescent lights in the parking garage hummed that night. I kept expecting someone to pull up, to ask what I was doing lingering like that, but no one ever did. I drove straight to my sister Tessa's place. She didn't ask many questions. She just made me tea and let me talk, or mostly just ramble. I told her about Mort, about the server room, about Winnie's stare. She thought I was burned out, that Innovatech was getting to me, and honestly, maybe it was. It was a demanding job. I didn't go back to work. I called in sick for 1 week, then used up some vacation time. Winnie emailed, just checking in. It was polite and concerned. I ignored it. I started looking for other jobs, anything to get away. I kept expecting the police to show up, to ask about the break-in. Maybe Mort had reported something, but they didn't. It was like it hadn't happened. Then I found out Ruben from accounting. We barely spoke, just exchanged pleasantries by the coffee machine, had been quietly transferred to the Chicago office. There was no explanation, just moved. I remember thinking it was a promotion, a good thing. That Innovatec was actually looking out for people, recognizing talent. Now I wonder. They were always so focused on employee growth, weren't they? It felt less like support and more like reshuffling. I haven't been to a networking event since, not even a small one. I used to go to those all the time thinking it was important for career advancement. Now, the thought of being in a room full of people I don't really know, exchanging business cards and making small talk, it just feels wrong, like walking into a trap. I stick to online applications now, anything to avoid the room.